Over the years that we participate in a church, we are afforded the opportunities to know people we otherwise would not have met. We get to know them in classes and small groups, in conversations after services, in meetings, in the midst of church projects and social action events. Sometimes these people become our friends. Sometimes they remain as acquaintances that we only know on a surface level. And yet, being part of a church family, we call them our own, and we value the way their lives intersect with ours. Over time, many of us begin to see that this church family can actually be one of the richest families of our lives, both for what we do know and for what we come to know and reflect upon after our friends here make their final exits from life. Each year, we say farewell to some of our friends, sharing in storytelling and celebrations of life that teach or remind us of things that we may need to know. And thereby the wisdom carried by each of us gets passed on to those who remain. One of the many privileges of my ministry, and I would argue our shared ministry, is the opportunity to learn from the lives of those who share our church, to celebrate the living we have shared with them. And so now, as is our custom at this Festival of Remembrance service, I will share reflections about members of our church who have died in this past year. And Carla will light a candle each time we celebrate a life. May you be enriched by these remembrances, finding in them perhaps nuggets of wisdom or memory that you may carry with you in the days to come. Even though she was not a member of our church, we begin by lighting a candle for Louise LaCroix, Unity Circle participant, wife of longtime member Fred. Louise met Fred while they were both earning master's degrees in library science at the University of North Carolina. After a few years in Lincoln, Nebraska, and Grinnell, Iowa, the couple moved here to Des Moines, where Louise was active raising their 3 daughters, caring for family pets, and participating at Plymouth Church, where she was a member. Louise fought a succession of cancers over the years and diabetes over 10 years, but fought back with regular 2-mile walks, even with a walker, up to this fall. I know I'll miss seeing Louise walking around the neighborhood where we both lived and having her check in with me on the status and health of my family and my pets. Louise died on October 15th at the age of 75. A lovely service celebrating her life was held at Plymouth Church this past Wednesday with many First Unitarian members in attendance. Today we remember and light a candle for Nett, who died on January 15th at the age of 88. Dell was born near Los Angeles and spent his childhood in California before serving in the Merchant Marines and as a radio operator during the Korean War. While attending Abilene Christian College on the GI Bill, he met and began dating a journalism major named Sandra Thompson. Sandy says that both she and Dell were at the school in part to find a marriage partner. And so they dutifully idealized each other enough to find what they thought they were looking for. Within a few months after meeting, they were married. After a brief stint in Colorado where Dell taught, the couple began their time in Iowa, beginning with Dell earning an MFA in writing at the University of Iowa. When Sandy began an internship at the Child Guidance Center in Ankeny, where she would work for 36 years, Dell enrolled at Iowa State, studying counseling and psychology. He started making counseling movies on the side, including a film for Planned Parenthood. With some initial success, he began to envision a future as a filmmaker, encouraging his friend Larry Link to be a partner with him in the film company. While the film company did not turn out to be the lucrative enterprise he hoped it would be, Dell's schedule enabled him to be home with his kids, Elliot and Laura, and active in their lives. Dell, through his writing and filmmaking, modeled for his children the value of being creative, whether it made money or not. About 12 years ago, Dell was diagnosed with advanced colon cancer. With the encouragement of a spiritual teacher and Ayurvedic practitioner, Alakananda Ma, Dell made what some would call a miraculous recovery. Still, in the past year or so, it was clear that Dell was slowing down, at least physically. He'd been telling Sandy that he was ready for death, that he had completed his bucket list and had nothing left he felt he had to do. On his final day, while he was in California with Sandy for the winter, he was to play tennis with Elliot, but his heart simply and finally stopped beating. A peaceful ending for this creative, eccentric, stubborn, and fun-loving student of life who never stopped learning and growing. Today, we remember and light a candle for James Herteen, who died on January 25th at the age of 76. We only knew Jim for a short time here, as he had quietly accompanied his wife, Mary Harlan, when she returned to the church a few years ago. We may have images of Jim in the scooter that he rode when his health began to fail him, and images of him being disappointed by his circumstances as he lost his mobility and his ability to work and pursue his hobbies. Jim was adopted at a young age by Laura and W.O. Herteen, the eventual co-founder of Herteen and Stocker Jewelers in Iowa City. He endured a stutter that impacted his life from a young age, finding his only respite from the stutter in singing, which he enjoyed throughout his life, participating in choirs and barbershop quartets. Jim's career path was found in the family jewelry business, and in particular, watchmaking and repair. He was an active ham radio operator. His love life was challenging. He navigated a first early marriage that ended due in part to his wife's difficulties with alcohol. Another marriage lasted just a year. Yet another marriage while he was living in Kansas ended before it began. The day of the wedding, his wife-to-be died in an auto accident. Another relationship of significance was his several-year marriage to the mother of his only son, Darren, from whom he was estranged until the final 4 years of his life. In the late 80s, Mary Harlan, a mother of 3 teenaged sons, began attending a singles group that used to meet at this church called Singletarians. At one meeting, a presentation was made by professional matchmakers, during which a drawing was held for free services. Mary won and was soon matched with Jim. For several years, Mary and Jim maintained a weekend friendship of dining out and going to movies and enjoying each other's company. Jim started nudging Mary to become his wife. She resisted, telling him she wasn't going to change her name, change her church, or give up her job. She was open to moving as long as they stayed in Des Moines. Jim persisted, and Mary said yes. Mary and Jim's 22-year marriage was not always easy, but it was a constant in both of their lives, commitment being something that was important to both of them. When looking back at the arc of Jim's life, we can see significant obstacles and disappointments that he overcame, and a fair amount of obstacles he may have created for himself. But who can judge a life that we have not lived ourselves? Who among us can fully grasp the influences that lead one to the decisions that can seem so perplexing to those of us with different perspectives? Jim did the best that he could, just as we all do. His best may not have always matched the expectations that others had for him, but it was his best all the same. Today we remember and light a candle for John Swanson, who died on April 22nd at the age of 91. John spent most of his childhood in Des Moines and had begun his college career at Drake and the University of Iowa when, just 2 days after his 18th birthday, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. He enlisted in the Army Air Corps and was eventually called to Texas to train as a pilot. While at the base, he met a woman named Wissy, with whom he would build a relationship through letter writing while he served abroad. John flew over 1,000 hours of missions during the war, carrying barrels of plane fuel between India and China. These missions were dangerous not just because the young pilots were flying unarmed in a war zone or because they were carrying explosive fuel over the Himalayas, but because they did so while smoking in the cockpit. He earned several medals for his service, including the Distinguished Flying Cross. His daughters told me that their dad rarely talked about his time in the service until a Veterans History Project encouraged the recording of remembrances and memories. When he was asked why he hadn't spoken about his military service, John said in the humble fashion common for his generation, "We did what we were asked to do. No one was a hero. We came home and we got on with our lives." For 14 months after the surrender of Japan, John continued to fly cargo missions, transporting troops down from Calcutta. When he received his honorable discharge from the service, he wasted no time returning to Iowa to finish his studies and reconnecting with Wissy, eventually eloping, so, as John once told me, we could save a lot of people a lot of trouble. The newlyweds settled in Des Moines with John running a business with his dad, the Carol Swanson Sales Company, that specialized in feed ingredients. The couple raised 3 daughters, Luana, Esta, and Amy. When they first moved to Des Moines, John and Wissy attended First Christian Church, where John had grown up, which seemed to work well for a while. But the story goes, one day their daughter Luana was in her playpen in the backyard when it began to rain. Luana looked up at the sky and said, "Jesus, Jesus, turn it off." Wissy decided then and there they needed to find a different church. They landed at First Unitarian in the late 1950s, right around the time that this building was built. Wissy was the consummate church volunteer, but John did his part too, serving stints on the church finance committee and faithfully attending, at least on Sundays when rounds of golf didn't interfere. John lived all but the last few years of his life free from health concerns, but Wissy was not so fortunate. She suffered a stroke at the age of 64 that paralyzed one side of her body and took away her ability to speak more than just a few words. For 17 years, until her death in 2006, John was her primary caregiver. He received respite help from daughter Amy, but he carried much of the load himself for years. It was a difficult job at times, but one that John accepted with grace. The children say that after the stroke, a closeness developed between their parents as a deeper relationship sprouted from their challenges. There could be no doubt to even the casual observer, John and Wissy loved each other dearly. In the years following Wissy's death, John had to face the loneliness that can come with the death of a partner of 59 years. Still, he enjoyed friendships and visits from family, especially time spent with his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And he continued to golf and keep up with his financial planning until his eyesight made it impossible to do so. His final days were spent in the care of hospice and in the company of his family as they told stories in his presence of the lives they had lived together, laughing and reveling in the love they had shared, in the joy they received from being loved by this loving and supportive man, and also mourning the passing of time and the changes to come. As John faded from this life, his final words to his daughters were perhaps the most important ones, words he had shared before that will always live, even beyond his death. He said, "I love you," and there could be no doubt that he did. Today we remember and light a candle for Priscilla Witke, who died on June 12th at the age of 76. Priscilla spent her childhood in Delaware before attending Columbia and Northwestern universities studying theater. While at Northwestern, she met David Quinn, and they began a romance that continued through his service in the Navy and into a nearly 55-year marriage. They spent a few years in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, where Priscilla attended the University of Illinois and completed her degree in social sciences. While there, Priscilla was an active citizen, working for an open housing drive, joining civil rights demonstrations, studying women's rights strategies. Upon moving to Des Moines, Priscilla worked first as a social worker for Polk County. Then, after becoming a parent of their only son, Carl, she was hired as the religious education director of this church, a 12-hour-a-week job at the time that was probably more like full-time. While running the Sunday school, Priscilla was instrumental in bringing the About Your Sexuality curriculum to Des Moines, the program that today we call Our Whole Lives, or OWL. In 1981, she was honored with this church's Unsung UU Award, which was an award she probably could have received many years, for she regularly sat on committees, sang in the choir, showed up for meetings, and offered warm greetings to newcomers. Many people have told me Priscilla was one of the first people they met here. Priscilla returned to full-time employment a few years later, beginning a long career as a taxpayer assistant representative for the IRS, and later for the Social Security Office, jobs in which she found satisfaction, helping people who really needed help to work through the complications of bureaucracy. Priscilla was outspoken through her life on issues of women's empowerment. She was a feminist through and through, but she was not a man-hater. She liked men and had many male friends. She felt men were just as trapped in the male-centric culture as women were, that men were constricted by this culture, just in different ways. In 2008, Priscilla was diagnosed with breast cancer, which later metastasized to her hip, then her liver, and finally to her brain. She handled the approach of death with equanimity, saying, "I am 76 and I've had a long, full, and satisfying life. We know lots of people who died much younger. What have I got to complain about?" Throughout her final weeks, during treatment she received in Vermont while visiting her son, a caregiver summed up the kind of person Priscilla was throughout her life. He said, "Most of the patients don't even talk to me except to tell me what to do. Priscilla wants to know about me and where I came from and what I hope to do with my life. She's special." All who knew Priscilla know how special she was, and we feel it especially in her absence. The ways she engaged with us and paid attention to us, the way she lived her life on her terms and encouraged us to do the same. She certainly was special to David, navigating and nurturing with him a relationship of love and understanding that could be a model for us all. A relationship that David must have hoped for when he wrote a poem for her not long after they started dating. A poem that led Priscilla to tell her roommate at the time, "Oh my God, this boy is writing me poetry." When I asked David if he still had a copy of the poem, he recited it to me by memory. And I share it with you now because it captures not only the delight of young love, but the bittersweet reality that this life, this precious life, is not ours to keep. David wrote to Priscilla in October, "Brown-eyed girl, please walk with me beside the shore along the sand. Brown-eyed girl, please talk with me and let me hold your slender hand. Autumn soon will pass and leave us, winter come to spend its while. All I ask of fair October is the memory of your smile." Priscilla, thank you for getting to know us and for loving us and for being cranky with us and for finding the good in us. Thank you for being your unique self. Your life enriched ours, your life mattered, and we are grateful to have shared it with you. Today we remember and light a candle for Ruthanne Harstad, who died on July 20th at the age of 62. Ruthanne was born and raised in Cedar Rapids. She was a lifelong learner. She earned several degrees and appreciated many life-changing experiences and adventures. At the age of 16, Ruthanne spent the summer in the jungle of Guyana, South America. She then participated in a 6-week North Cascades expedition, learning leadership and backpacking, rock, snow, and ice climbing. And then the following year, she became the first woman from Iowa to solo hike the Appalachian Trail, 2,083 miles from Georgia to Maine, carrying an 80-pound pack and averaging 21 miles per day through the mountains of 14 states. Ruthanne had more than 100 jobs in about 50 different careers. Some of her favorites were teaching physical fitness and survival in nature, being a letter carrier, and teaching college courses, including speech, composition and literature, women's literature, and African American literature, humanities through the arts. She enjoyed helping people with their finances, and since 2000 was a tax preparer at H&R Block. In 1985, while Ruthanne was teaching a women's literature class at Indian Hills Community College in Ottumwa, a non-traditional student named Pat Headley took a seat in the front row. Before long, the two began becoming better acquainted, eventually playing racquetball and trading stories. By November, the two were dating, thereby ensuring that Pat would never be a student in one of Ruthanne's classes again. Pat said that in the years before she met Ruthanne, as Pat's marriage unraveled, she had a recurrent vision. Pat had a recurrent vision that a woman would come and get her out of Ottumwa. She said it was always a woman. Ottumwa was a town she feared she might never escape. As it turns out, that woman was Ruthanne. In 1989, the couple moved to Des Moines, where Ruthanne had accepted a job at DMAC. They shared their loving relationship for 30 years, including the last 5 as a legally married couple at last. Together, they enjoyed 2 daughters and 5 grandchildren. Ruthanne hiked in 50 states, backpacked in 34, as well as most Canadian provinces. When she visited friends abroad, she joined them in hiking or backpacking adventures. She led many backpacking and hiking trips for women of all ages, many with Pat. She was active in the formation of Indian Creek Nature Center in Cedar Rapids. Ruthanne was always gregarious and friendly and a lifelong activist for social justice, including working to undo racism, supporting feminist causes and environmental awareness. And she was active in this church, often behind the scenes, and played a vital role for many years in stewarding our congregation's endowment fund. She contributed time and money to many causes throughout her life, starting college funds for 26 young people and supporting the arts. She was quick to lend a hand or a kind word to a friend in need, and she was especially good at journeying with her friends who, like her, were navigating cancer. All of us who knew Ruthanne over the past dozen years or so know how valiantly she endured her own health challenges, including ovarian cancer compounded by years of chemo-induced kidney failure, chronic lymphedema, and multiple sclerosis. Ruthanne's will to live and her exuberance for life were extraordinary. She lived courageously in the face of her prolonged and epic battles against her illnesses. I can't imagine that I will ever meet anyone who will match the spirit with which she approached her life. We celebrated Ruthanne's life here in this hall just a few weeks before she died, the room filled with friends and lovely memories of a brilliant, funny, caring, passionate, adventurous, opinionated, Renaissance woman with a fierce and courageous resolve to live and love as fully as she possibly could for as long as she possibly could. She taught all those who knew her to wring every last drop of living out of life, and we are grateful for the lessons. Today we remember and light a candle for Brian Browning, who died on August 15th at the age of 58. Brian grew up in New Mexico and Nebraska, attending the University of Nebraska, majoring in anthropology with minors in history and English. He spent a few years off and on in law school at the University of Iowa, but did not find a fit, eventually dropping out to work in carpentry, stone masonry, and home remodeling. He would say, "We have to spend too much time at our jobs to be miserable." I'm going to say that again. We have to spend too much time at our jobs to be miserable. While in between attempts at law school, he began dating Mary Kay Reeser, eventually marrying her and moving to Des Moines. Together, they had 4 children. During the first administration of Governor Branstad in the 90s, Brian began working at Terrace Hill as the first as the historical preservation technician there, and then later as the administrator during the Culver administration. However, upon Governor Branstad's reelection, Brian was let go so that the governor could bring back his former staff. This was a significant loss for Brian. He felt bereft of purpose as work that had brought him so much meaning was taken from him. And thus began one of the more bleak times in Brian's life as he struggled to find a good fit for his interests and skills, a fit he never fully found again. He enjoyed part-time opportunities at Simpson College, including teaching Iowa history and working for the Iowa History Center there. But these were not the kind of opportunities that he could fully give himself to, nor did they provide the income he was accustomed to earning and that his skill set should have demanded. And so he chose to supplement his income by working part-time at the neighborhood Hy-Vee drugstore, where his son Sam also worked, a place where many of us had regular interactions with him. Even as Brian may have struggled to find a career fit following his time at Terrace Hill, the story of how he navigated it all turned out to be a story of more than sadness and disappointment. His story is one of resilience and adaptability, and perhaps most importantly, of family, for his lack of full-time employment brought him at least one benefit that could not be denied: more precious time to be with those who mattered the most. And it was his family who helped him shake his depression that he experienced along the way, especially when he worked with his son Sam on an original card game that over the years became a family project. Brian and Mary Kay began attending this church a few years ago, a step he couldn't have predicted given his leanings away from organized religion. His kids told me of a time when the family was still trying to find a home in a local Christian congregation. They were attending an Easter service with their dad, and before too far into it, he encouraged them to actually leave the service early so that they could go outside to create an impromptu blessing of the trees ceremony, a springtime observance more befitting his true religion. In the short time that Brian shared with us in this church, he served on hospitality teams, helped with the activities of the Energy and Justice for All group. He participated in small groups and offered his building and volunteer management skills as our congregation constructed a fence for Monsoon, a local service agency, this past summer. His death came suddenly and without warning, leaving the family and those who knew Brian here stunned and sad. We miss his curiosity and his conversation, but we carry with us the memories of a kind and gentle person whose life can teach us all that our time on this earth is too short to be miserable. Today we remember and light a candle for David Quinn, who died on August 30th at the age of 37. Gordon David Quinn Jr. was born in Des Moines and lived most of his life here, except for a few years in Minneapolis, following the college degree he earned at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. David had a lifelong interest in learning and creating. His mom recalls a trip they made to the fair when David was 8, how he spent most of the day at the weaving exhibition, watching wool taken directly from sheep being worked into weavings. He came home and started collecting all the hair from the cats and dogs in the home so that he could create his own works of art. By this time, his parents had divorced, and another parental figure had entered the picture for David and his sister Laura, a woman known as Grant, a woman who not only became, for all intents and purposes, their second mother, but who also nurtured in David an appreciation for building, painting, and power tools. He was active in swing choir, theater, and art classes and social clubs in high school, but he was also active in exploring religion and the meaning of life. He came across books on New Age philosophies and eventually paganism, finding a spirituality in these words that matched his own. He attended his first pagan group event in high school and was amazed at how the ritual was structured around personal connection with the divine and the use of air, earth, fire, and water as both manifestations of and metaphor for the forces that affect our lives. He said, "I was sold and I have self-identified as pagan ever since." By the age of 20, he was helping to organize and lead pagan groups of his own, efforts he continued and enjoyed throughout his adult life. He settled into a career at EP2, where he was a project specialist, putting to good use his engineering instincts, his ability to make difficult things possible, and to find solutions to problems that could baffle other people. During the Yule season in 2008, David met Andrea Morton at a pagan group. By the spring of 2010, they'd started dating, taking it slowly. Andrea had 5 children already, so there were many relationships for David to navigate. He took his time to get to know each of Andrea's children, and in December of 2012, David and Andrea were married in this hall in a ceremony that blended rituals from their pagan and now emerging UU religions. They'd found First Unitarian as a result of being invited to a ritual led by member Cynthia Lee. Curious about this church that left room for pagans, they attended a Sunday service as well and were pleasantly surprised by the welcome they found here. They quickly got involved, helping form what would become the Sacred Bridges Cups group with their friends Zach and Janelle Bailey and others. But David did not participate here solely on behalf of his pagan perspective. He worked on other matters too, lending his presence to the Grounds Council and the Celebrant team, and in one of the more important legacies he left us in his short time as a member, he helped lead efforts to renew, reshape, and repurpose our church grounds. He spent countless hours over many seasons carving paths and imagining, building, and maintaining a labyrinth in our woods. He loved our property, and his spirit and hard work are evident to all who enjoy it today and who will in the days to come. Since last fall, David started experiencing complications from polycystic kidney disease, a genetic disorder through which cysts form in his kidneys, ballooning them to the size of footballs. Lots of medical treatment ensued, with little ultimately helping much. He spent many days in the hospital and was supplied with many prescriptions to help ease the pain his condition brought, pain that David said was like a knife in his back. He had to back off his many commitments and missed occasional days of work. We could see this new reality was a heavy burden for him and was bringing him down. Given all that he'd been through and all he was enduring, we can understand how the night he died, he must have taken a few too many pills to try to get the sleep he desired. How, eager to rest, he ended up taking a few too many, enough as it turned out to take him from us. His sudden death leaves another big hole for this congregation. But David would want us to remember there's more than empty space that he's left behind. There are memories of life and laughter and love. There are works of art that he made, and there are the ways he modeled for us what showing up looks like and what commitment looks like. His legacy of love, of being responsible, have touched the lives of his family and all who knew him best, and he will certainly be missed. but not forgotten.